Welcome to the third of our stories from the church spot. My name's Carl. I teach theology and preaching and work in community care here at SMBC. So far in our three-part series of stories of the church, I've shared some of my experiences as a church pastor. In the first episode, I shared about some key talks that shaped my vision of ministry and that were really significant for me as I began ministry in the church. In the second, I shared about how often hidden examples of what God is doing in the church, the examples of what God is doing in the church are often hidden from our sight, and that we need to kind of be aware of what God is doing. And today I want to share with you a bit of a story about misunderstandings of love. Don't you love the people in the church? He asked me as he sat across the other side of the table at my dining room. To put things in context, I'd just begun a period of time off because I'd burnt out in ministry. I'd reached the point where I thought I just needed to take a break. One of the main warning signs of that was inexplicably bursting into tears at various points in the day when insignificant things happened. It felt like the church was sinking and I was stretched out with my limbs desperately trying to plug the holes, and I wasn't sure anymore that I could keep going. I felt like I'd given everything that I had to give, and now he was sitting here in my house asking me whether I really loved the people. I'm not quite sure what he thought I'd been doing for the last 7 years, arriving early to church to set things up, staying late, working relentlessly to get things done. Whatever he was thinking, it was profoundly hurtful. But why did he ask the question? At the time, that was much too painful for me to understand what lay behind it. But as time has gone on, I think that maybe I've begun to understand what he was getting at. You might be familiar with the term love languages. The idea comes from the pastor Gary Chapman, and he came up with these 5 love languages: words of affirmation, quality time, physical touch, acts of service, receiving gifts. And the idea is, as you might know, that people tend to express love in particular ways, and they tend to sort of receive love or look for love in particular ways. The problem comes when there's a mismatch between how people express love and how they sort of look for love, and when they don't realise that mismatch. So a husband might tend to express his love for his wife in acts of service, but she thinks that the most important expression of love is quality time. And so when he lovingly cooks dinner every night because he loves her, all she can think is, he's so busy cooking that we never have time to spend together. Now, you can pick holes in the idea of love languages, but the idea, I think, has some kind of usefulness. There can be a mismatch in the way that we love others and how we expect to be loved. And just as there are love languages in marriages and other relationships, there are also, I think, love languages in ministry. I don't mean those particular 5 love languages, but I do mean there are hidden assumptions about what it looks like to love people. You see, I think this other person and I had 2 different visions of what it meant for a pastor to love people in the church. It came down to a different vision or philosophy of ministry. I think for him, loving people meant being a little bit like the Puritan pastor Richard Baxter, whose model of ministry was to be constantly in people's houses, discipling them and their families. That wasn't the shape of my ministry, and so he concluded that the reason must be that I didn't love the people. I, on the other hand, had a different philosophy of ministry. My model was equipping the saints for works of service, which didn't exclude being in people's houses, but it meant that I was working hard to cultivate a culture in which people were ministering to one another. The church had got too big by that time for me to be doing everything, and in my mind, I was trying to love the people. It's interesting, I think, that in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, Paul experiences a similar misunderstanding about love. He says to the Corinthians there, "We are not withholding our affection from you, but you are withholding yours from us." The Corinthians thought that Paul didn't love them. They thought that he was withholding his love from them. Paul had loved them in an unusual and difficult way. He loved them by challenging sin in the church. But that didn't feel like love to them. But in the verses just before, he's talked about the evidence of his love. He recounts all the hardships that he's endured in ministering to them: afflictions, hardships, distresses, beatings, imprisonments, riots, hard work, sleepless nights, hunger, patience, kindness, sincere love, truthful speech. He's experienced glory and dishonour, bad report and good report. He'd been genuine but regarded as an imposter. He'd been known yet regarded as unknown. It's a heartbreaking list. Paul had loved the Corinthians at great personal cost to himself, but here they were accusing him of not really loving them at all. They expected Paul to love them in a particular way, but the way he had loved them was different, but that didn't mean that he didn't love them. The problem was a mismatched vision of what love looked like, and the same, I think, happens to us as well. The way that we love people and the way that they expect to be loved don't always meet. That doesn't mean that we should ignore the question when it's asked, even if it's painful. Do I love these people? But sometimes it's helpful to recognise that the problem is not love, but a misunderstanding of what it looks like to love people.